position, relax your shoulders and your hands, your feet. Take a deep breath and be at ease. Close your eyes if you're willing. And just allow yourself to feel safe for a moment. To know that in this space right now there is nothing to harm you, nothing to argue with you, and that everyone around you wishes for your well-being. See if you can feel the well-being that they are wishing for you, and project it back. Think for a moment of the people around you, whether you know them or not, and actively imagine, I wish you well. I wish you comfort and peace and happiness and abundance. Imagine you are a magic wand, propelling that peace and joy outward, and people actually receiving it. And that maybe something happens today to all those people whom you've sent that joy and peace to, actually having a better day than they would have otherwise. And from that you receive it for yourself. And that you empower this divine spark within you that has the capacity to do just as I'm suggesting. That you have so much light within you and such a capacity to share it and to provide comfort and ease where there is so much anxiety and grief. That you imagine yourself as someone who could walk into a room and people's shoulders rest just because you're there. This is you. This is what you're capable of. This is the love you bring into this world. Remember it. Take one final breath and return. So, Women's History Month. I find this a particularly important month. A, because if it weren't for women, none of us would be here. But there is so much more to this than just the accomplishments of women in the world, because what I want to talk about is what underlies those accomplishments. What makes those accomplishments occur in spite of forces that would seek to thwart them. That special, very particular divine light. So you might be surprised to learn, I know I was, that a matriarchy is not actually the opposite of a patriarchy. Would you be surprised to know that? Mm-hmm. You would probably, if you were asked to come up with antonyms in elementary school and someone said matriarchy, you might have looked it up and you might have said patriarchy, but it's actually not true. Oh, I have musical accompaniment today. Thank you. So it's not surprising that you would think that. It feels logical. In our still mostly patriarchal world, we conceptualize a matriarchy as being the inverse of a system led almost exclusively by men. But matriarchy is not the polar opposite of patriarchy. And it's not that hard to imagine, however, when we really consider it, because if we are honest with ourselves about what women would actually do, would really do, if given the chance to have a full and true influence over our systems of business and government, many of us would instinctively feel that they would not choose the subordination of men to accomplish it. It's not hard to imagine that women would instead find ways of including men. And in fact, a true matriarchy is not at all defined by an absence of men in leadership. On the contrary, matriarchies instinctively understand the need for broad participation and equity among the genders. So is it wrong then that matriarchy is not about a system of control by women? Shouldn't it be that a system which has for so many centuries disfavored the presence of women in leadership find an appropriate balance in the near complete replacement of men with women? That's certainly what a patriarchal system feels threatened by, after all. They feel that if they let women take command, they are out of a job. But I suspect that viewpoint comes from the fact that that's what has been their methodology all along. To men, it would seem only natural that women would want to do the same thing to them that they have done to women. Men in the aggregate, unfortunately, tend to see things in terms of vengeance like that, stereotype acknowledged. But there is wisdom in the feminine divine. And in honor of Women's History Month, we might spend a moment considering it. For the record, the feminine divine is not about women so much as it is about the attributes of the female archetype that exist beyond biological understandings of gender. Each of us has both masculine and feminine characteristics to our behavior. There is a spiritual viewpoint that these traits are part of our eternal self rather than of our earthly biology. The feminine divine is seen as the goddess energy that exists within all of us. It is the aspect that creates our bond with the earth. It is the power of creation and nurturing. It is the wisdom of partnership, collaboration, and communication. The feminine divine seeks self-mastery, but it does not conquer others to gain it. I think I'll say that again. The feminine divine seeks self-mastery, but does not conquer others to gain it. Its choices are oriented toward joy rather than accomplishment, and defines success through relationships. Many in the world today are gripped with fear about what is to become of our conflicted society. And their fears are really understandable. I have said before, however, that the world has been steadily progressing over the past several hundred years, snowballing to even greater degrees in the last several decades. You'll note that while patriarchal systems of government and business have worked diligently to suppress the aspects of the feminine divine in our society, namely greater collaboration among diverse peoples and the steady expansion of human rights, the aspect of the feminine divine have still increased on this planet unabated. And we have only to consider the improvement in the lives of women and people of color over the past decades to recognize it, not to suggest that these movements are anywhere near finished with the business of creating greater equity in the world and the attempt at contracting it further. But we should not fail to encourage ourselves with the vast amount of progress already achieved. There is a reason why that progress has happened, and that progress is what's inspiring the backlash we see. The backlash is the proof of the forward momentum that we have. This progress should act as a boon to our continuing efforts. But we so quickly forget our past accomplishments in favor of our aspirations not yet reached. We eventually get what we asked for, or at least a form of it. But then that progress only serves to remind us more about how that work is not yet done. Once we reach a horizon, there is yet another horizon in the distance. For example, once women had the right to vote, we then aspired to elect them to office. And in case anybody hasn't noticed it, let's just consider in the span of our own lifetimes the number of women that were in elected office at our birth versus today. And if you don't see that trend as being something part of a greater reality that's operating without resistance or without being pushed back, they try to resist. We know that we've watched it. We've seen people come out and say, women should go back to the kitchens. We've actually watched that with our own eyes. But it has not resulted in the greater number of women back in kitchens, has it? It has resulted in greater numbers of women in office. So when we look at what appears to be the contraction of all this that we've worked so hard for, remember that it's not really a contraction. It's a fight against progress. And that progress, like those who have been fighting against it, they are wimps in comparison to the way that it used to be. Think 100 years ago, they didn't have to raise a finger to keep women from having the right to vote. It was just logical to that time, until it no longer was. We have kept expanding. You've heard me say that from this spot before, and you will hear me say it again. Because what's happening in the world right now feels so demoralizing, so working against all the progress we've made. But who remembers the last midterms that occurred during a presidency we were worried about? No greater number of people of color, women, people of gender variance, they ran for office and were elected in record numbers. Native Americans. So the backlash to the backlash is forward momentum. We have only to consider the improvement in the lives of women and people of color over the past decades to recognize it. Just remember. There are some ancient traditions of spiritual thought which consider the northern hemisphere of our planet to symbolize the masculine divine and the southern hemisphere the feminine divine. Okay? And this piqued my interest when the first Catholic Pope from the southern hemisphere, Francis I, a gentle and egalitarian Jesuit, was elected to the office in 2013, following a stunning resignation by a decidedly toxic male authority, Pope Benedict XVI. You could look into that for whatever it's worth. But it's still interesting that all of these centuries of belief in the northern hemisphere representing this, and all of our popes were all from the northern hemisphere. And then now we have one from the southern hemisphere. I don't know how much truth that has, but I still found it very interesting. Because we can see the difference between what has been and who's there now. It's still not the way we would all want it necessarily, but you can still tell the difference. It's not proof of anything, but it's noteworthy. There have also been enormous shifts in our public discourse and art with regard to these aspects. Consider the fact that so much of our film, television, and literature has begun to focus on things like the backstories of villains. We want to know what made them the way they are. We wanted to know what made them hurt. And if you think that's not the feminine divine, nearly all of these stories construct their storylines around the humanization of these individuals and the often complex trauma which turned them toward a nefarious caricature. In other words, we started humanizing our fictional adversaries. Those shifts are firmly in the column of the feminine divine. And I don't believe that the word woke would have entered our public discourse at all if it weren't for the fact that the aspects of the feminine divine are now taking greater hold in our world. The patriarchy feels desperately threatened by this advancement, as we've seen. And since the word woke only refers to someone who possesses a broader understanding of the challenges that people face in our society and the ways that their trauma informs their behavior, and seeks to understand these challenges and to remedy them. I would think that's not a bad thing. When someone tells you that you are woke, please feel free to say thank you. And yet we see it with all the clarity of high definition, the desperation and rage who want things to go back to the way they were. Take heart from that. You know, we had that economic blackout on Friday, which I participated in, and I had two very conservative members of my family tell me how disappointed they were in me, in those exact words. And I have to say, I went, ooh, perhaps I'm doing the right thing. I would have been a little hurt by it. And, you know, the first person who said it to me, I was. The second person said to me, I went, oh. And I shared that post 10 more times that day. Take heart from whom you disappoint right now. My conclusion is that the feminine divine is steadily taking a more appropriate matriarchal role on this planet. There are no earthly powers sufficient to stop it. Balance is natural. Water always seeks its level. Likewise, the days are numbered for excessive masculinity in this world. To be fair, men will always have a place in our society. I'm saying this as though I'm not one of them. But you know what I mean. And we will not be excluded from leadership in the way that it has historically excluded women. Even though there are so many who are afraid of being displaced in exactly that way. But that's not what the feminine divine has foretold us in the recognition of its gentle but firm amplification in our culture. What it is saying is that all must be welcome at this table. And those who seek to exclude others shall, are, have, will go the way of the dinosaurs. Please rise for our closing hymn, number 120.